The last recording, it had sound, but when I uploaded it to YouTube, it had no sound. So I don't really know what's up with that.
Yeah, I think I can fix it. So I'll like go back and I'll like re-download it. I just haven't gotten the chance to, but yes.
You have access to the file though. I gave it to you.
Yes, I have access to the file. I just haven't had time to process it and upload it yet because it is like 2 hours long. I'm sorry for everybody who is like waiting for that. I will get that up as soon as I can. It'll probably be like sometime this week actually. So today,
wait, Christian says, "Can you give me the permission to record?"
Yeah, you're a co-host now, Christian, so you should be able to record if you want. And yeah, so today's tutorial will be on post-processing. So first, I just like to say, is anybody having like problems getting the file to load? Like any issues there? Please say something now.
I haven't done it yet.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Great, thank you for your input. Anybody else? Okay. I will assume that you guys have it open. If you guys don't, just like PM Evan, Christian, whatever, to like, you know, get that set up. It's like a very easy setup process. The file is just kind of fat. So for those who don't know, post-processing is traditionally a very film-based element. It's something that you see in movies a lot, where you see like films where they show like a before and after they've edited a film, and suddenly like all the colors seem sharper, you know, like, you know, why is there so much contrast here? Like, how come the reds are showing up here? You know, like, how did they get the motion blur and like stuff like that? And so what Unity does is Unity has a plugin that allows you to apply all of these film features to games. So this is very useful if you want to later work on cutscenes, if you want to add effects to your game. Like, let's say you have a horror game and you want to make it seem like it's like that 80s kind of film grain. Well, there are effects that let you do that. So that is what post-processing does for you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now so you guys can take a look. Screen, closing here, share. Oh yeah, and another thing is a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about will also be covered on the PowerPoint. It's just the order might be a little bit different. So you guys can also reference that if you guys are having, I guess, like issues. Okay, so my first question is, you know, like, why is like post-processing like really that special? You know, like some people might think like post-processing isn't that necessary. Okay, like they might be like, you know, like it's like whatever. So first, my question is, do you guys want to see the scene without post-processing first or with post-processing first? I will give that option to you guys.
Without.
Without?
Yeah, without.
Okay, without. Okay, I'll play it here. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what the scene looks like without post-processing. It's a little long. I'll kind of just like let it play out.
Is this the same one from last year?
Yeah, this is the same one from last year. I didn't have time to make another. But yeah, this is the same tutorial from last year. I will be expanding on some of the effects, however, that we didn't cover last year. So if this is a repeat for you, just know that. Yeah, so like this is kind of the scene, like what it looks like. You'll see what's going. Also, if you want to learn how to make cinematics like this, Unity has a plugin called Cinemachine that I will not be going into, but it's something that you can also look at. But yeah, pretty like mundane, like smooth gray walls, some lights, but it's not really, you know, that interesting. Let's see what I try to say. Yeah, these are very nice shots. Again, Cinemachine is a god. If you want to make like cutscenes, Cinemachines is like kind of where you want to be. Okay, so that's like a pretty good gist of it. You guys can like watch the entire thing on your own time. Now here's the scene with post-processing. Keep in mind that all that was changed was adding post-processing effects. Nothing else was edited. Okay. Yeah. So all that. Yeah, right. So all that was done was just adding like, I think it was like 5 or 6 post-processing effects, and then you can get to this level of detail. And so that's why this is so important, because you don't want to go in and with like vectors, like manually making every single light reflection, right? Like that's going to take you so much time, and it's going to be such a waste on like your computer processing power and memory. Yeah, so like this is one of the ways that's useful, and it's also useful because you don't need to know any code to be able to do this. Okay, questions. Yeah, the reflections. I will be going into how to do that. Yes. Yeah, so you guys see the difference. You guys can watch this on your own time as well. I just won't bore you guys with this. Yeah, I think now we're going to hop into the tutorial. So there are two scenes that you guys can be looking at. One is called the testing scene, and one is called the cinematic scene. So the cinematic scene is essentially the scene that I just played, except it doesn't have any of the post-processing effects added. The testing scene is kind of like a testing environment for you to kind of test some effects if you don't exactly know what it looks like in the regular scene. These blocks are like white right now, which might not be very conducive to your overall like testing. So I'll show you guys how to make a material in just a few seconds. But first off, for those who missed my last one, perhaps, please have your game and your scene in separate windows. You want to be able to see your game, your scene, your hierarchy, your inspector, and your project. Your console is not very important this time around. But yeah, please, especially your game and your scene should be separate so you can see the edit. Okay. And so really quickly, I'm just going to go into how to make a material. This will probably be like another tutorial later on, but this is just going to give your cube a little bit of color when you want to test certain effects, if you want to do it in your test scene. So all that is you right click somewhere in your project, you'll go to create, and then you'll go to material. All right, and then you can name it whatever. I'm just going to name it the color that I'm going to give it. So I'm just going to call it red. And then I'm going to go over here in your inspector for this texture, this material right here. I'm going to go to albedo, click on the little white square, and I'm just going to change the color to, it can be whatever you want. I'm just going to change it to red. All right. And then you can drag this into your cube to kind of like make, like see it, test it, make sure it's working. All materials by default are prefabs, which means that whatever changes you make to the material will also apply to whatever object you apply that material to. So if I drag this red to both cubes will change color. You'll see here if I just change this color over here. Yeah. And you can get fancy with it if you like really want to. You can give it like certain textures. Just double click here, and it'll bring up like a bunch of like textures, meshes that you can apply to it. Like,
Athena,
yes.
Sorry, what scene are we doing this in?
Oh, I'm just doing this in testing. My bad.
Okay.
Sorry for not specifying. Yeah.
I was like behind. Never.
Oh no, it's okay. But yeah, so you can choose like a bunch of different like textures here. This is not, albedo doesn't really control anything. You're gonna want to go to metallic if you want like a metallic texture to it. Yeah, so let's just go here, give it like a metallic texture, and you can just drag this up. It doesn't seem like much now. You'll see the difference when you start applying effects to it. TLDR. But yeah, so like that's just like a quick way for you to like change stuff up in your scene to just like allow you to test it a little bit better. However, yes.
Athena, is that material that you changed the color? Is it already existing in the scene, or did you make a new one?
No, I made one. So right click and then create and then material, and then you can inspect it and then change it however you want. This will be like another tutorial. Don't worry about like all the rest of this. It doesn't really matter. All you really need to worry about is albedo to change the color a little bit so you can see some effects better. Yeah. However, for the sake and purposes of things, I will be going through just the base tutorial in the cinematic scene. So this is the scene without any of the post-processing effects. Does anybody have any questions up till this point? Up till this point. Okay, cool. All right. So first we're going to start off by creating an empty object. So you can either go to this arrow here, or you can right click and just click create empty. And we're going to be calling this post processing. Okay. And then to that, oh shoot, my bad. I left out like a very crucial part of this tutorial. So you're going to want to go to, before any of this, you're going to want to be able to set up these effects to begin with, if that makes sense. You're going to need to download the actual post-processing plugins and the Cinemachine plugins for everything to work. I'm very sorry that I missed that step. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to Window, and you're going to want to go to Package Manager. This is where you're going to find basically all of your, you know, like plugins that you might ever need. And so the two plugins that we're going to be using is, one is Cinemachine. So you can either search it up in the search bar, or you can scroll down on the left-hand side. You should see it either way. And then down here, there should be like an install button or like something like that. So install Cinemachine. And the next one is just called post-processing.
If we install the package here, does that install it to like Unity in general, or is it just this project?
No, it just installs it to this project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cinemachine and post-processing?
Yes, Cinemachine and post-processing. Yes. Okay, I'll give you guys like a second just to like get that set up.
How did you make the red shiny?
You make the red shiny by, let me show you the inspector. There's already a bunch of preset like materials here. So just double clicking on this like little square, like you can barely see it, but there's like a little square next to the metallic word. Hello. It will open. Ah, there you go, it's open. So if you just scroll down into like all these lists of like textures, you can just choose like a reflective texture. That's all that I really did.
Oh wait, where did you click to get that pop out?
Yeah, so in the inspector for the material, you just want to click on the highlighted like little square here on the left, right next to the metallic
Next to
word.
metallic.
Yeah.
And then that gives you preset ones.
Yeah, it gives you like a huge list. I don't know why it's like very slow in opening up. There you go. Yeah, I can like make it a leaf if I like wanted to, you know, it's like stuff like that. And then you're just gonna want to adjust the like scale all the way up to like 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which scene are you doing stuff in right now?
Oh, I was just explaining the material itself to Evan. I wasn't actually working in a scene. I was just explaining it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully everybody has those plugins downloaded. Don't worry.
Is there anyone who's like behind right now? I think some people came in late, so like,
okay.
if you have questions about what's going on, please speak up.
Yeah, please ask. And like, better you ask now than get like really behind.
Plugins are still downloading.
Okay. Yeah, I can wait a little bit longer.
While you guys are waiting, shout out to the ACM Instagram page, which I'm currently doing an Instagram takeover on.
I'm on it.
Ew.
If you want to go see me making a fool of myself, talking about our committee, you can go ahead and check out the official UCLA ACM Instagram.
Disgusting.
Probably gonna post something about this on it actually. So
if you
get
want to
ready.
make fun of
Athena.
Evan. Yeah, I'll make a post about it soon. Okay. All right. Hopefully plugins are done. Let me know if they aren't done. Let me know if you guys have questions up till this point. Hopefully we're good. I think both.
Question: Will
both?
tutorials be uploaded to GS's channel or the ACM channel? Yeah. So we want to get them on both, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I'm like super behind on organizing that. But for now, I believe like the other officers have been uploading them to the like separate game studio channel. But yeah, I'm gonna have to organize with Catherine to make sure that we get it onto the official YouTube channel as well.
Yep. Okay, cool. Hopefully everyone has plugins downloaded and like things are running smoothly. So just picking up where I left off before we download the plugins, we created an empty object, which is just plus create empty. We named it post-processing. And here what we're going to do is we're going to add a component, and it's going to be called post-process volume. You can just search this in the search bar. All right, so you should see this new component popping up in the inspector. We have questions. Which scene is this in? I'm doing it in the cinematic scene. You guys can do it in the cinematic scene as well, or in the testing scene, whichever, floats your boat. Okay. So now that we have this, we're going to set or is global to true. So what this just means is that all the effects that we apply in post-processing will be applied to the entire scene. There are other ways you can control this too that we'll go into later. And then under profile, you're gonna want to click new. And then you should have like a new post-processing profile. You should see effects down here. So if you want to make like a bunch of other post-processing profiles, you just have to click new again or clone. That's just how it goes.
What's a profile? A post-processing
A profile is essentially, think of it as like a collection of one series of post-processing effects. Like let's say I have a very complex game going on and I want certain objects to reflect, but I want certain objects to not reflect off of things. So how I would do this is I would give that reflective object its own separate layer. I'll call it like reflective object. And then I'll create a new profile that's not global, that will only ever affect that reflective object. And then I'll create like other post-processing profiles to affect everything else. Does that kind of make sense?
So like if you want to have a different object behave differently under the post-processing filters, you want to give it a different profile.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So if we added an effect now, it's not actually going to do anything. The reason that this is because we haven't added a post-processing layer to our camera. So our camera doesn't know how to essentially compute all of the effects that we're going to give it. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on camera, go to our inspector and scroll all the way down, click on add component, and then add a post-process layer. So here, what you're going to change is you're going to set the layer to everything. This is again a certain way that you can make sure post-processing works for multiple things. Different layers will behave differently depending on what the camera sees. And then other than that, you're also going to set anti-aliasing to FXAA. What anti-aliasing is essentially in games, it smooths out the edges of things. So like, let's say you have a circle or you have a sphere. No anti-aliasing, if you zoom in close on that circle, you might see like a lot of really jagged edges because circles, anything in games is ultimately made up of like little tiny triangles, right? But if you have anti-aliasing, then the anti-aliasing will like kind of smooth that out, make sure everything looks like a little bit better. Yeah, so this especially works for effects.
Oh, basically pixel art is the opposite of anti-aliasing.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it. Yeah. Okay. So is anybody lost?
Sorry, this is on the camera. It's not on the post-processing object.
Yes. Okay. You're going to want to add a post-process layer to the camera and a post-process volume to the empty object. Yes. Is anybody confused up till this point? We good? Okay, cool. So now that everything is set.
Wait, sorry, say what anti-aliasing again, like, is just like one more time.
Yeah, for sure. Anti-aliasing is essentially smooths out all the effects and like smooths out everything. And I think if I hover over it, it'll actually say, give me 1 second. Never mind. It doesn't really explain what anti-aliasing itself is. So anti-aliasing essentially smooths out like all the edges of things. Like if you have like a polygon with like a lot of vertices, it'll smooth out sort of like the paths between them. It'll smooth out the effects. So like let's say you have a shadow, it's not going to seem like super sharp and like grainy. It just like adds like almost like a gradient to things is I guess the best way that I can.
On the edges, right? Specifically.
Yeah.
Or I guess it's not always on the edges, is it? If there's like I don't know, never mind. I guess it's not that important.
It's not very important. Just know that it exists. No. post-processing.
Okay, hold on. There's some questions. When did you add the Cinemachine stuff to the camera?
The Cinemachine stuff was added before this. It's just to bring you through the scene. Cinemachine is like a complex beast in and of itself, so that's why I'm not like leading you guys through that. That's like another tutorial. It was already added beforehand.
What are the plugins we have to download and where do you download them? They are post-processing in Cinemachine, and that is,
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat too.
she can demonstrate right here, but it's, you go to Window,
It's Window,
Package Manager, right?
and then
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the difference between
Okay.
post-processing AA and regular AA? Regular AA as in
That's a good
MSAA. What are these letters mean?
I think anti-aliasing. I
Oh,
think
okay.
I'm actually not too sure the difference. I think maybe I think maybe this is hard to say. I think
Isn't it
maybe
like
like some
post-processing is like specifically on the camera like rendering level
Yeah,
versus
I think so.
like on the sprite rendering level
Yeah,
is what
I think
regular
that's
would
it.
be.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We're gonna move on. So we're just gonna run through all of these effects that you guys have at your disposal. Again, you guys can see them happening in this game, in this little game scene that you guys have. So we're just gonna run through all of them. So first, we're gonna start off with ambient occlusion. So if you guys look at the PowerPoint, you guys will see an example of ambient occlusion. It essentially just deals with sort of like the level of shadows that you have in your scene. So like right now, this is like all like very single toned gray. Ambient occlusion, you can think of it as a kind of contrast. Essentially, it just really brings out the shadows in your game. So you're gonna want to set the mode. I set it to scalable. I think the only difference between scalable and multi-scale is that scalable is a little bit slower. It takes a little bit more computing, and it's best suited for like only PC stuff. So if you're going to be porting to mobile, you probably want to use multi instead of scalable. You want to check intensity, check radius. Let me see, I have a question. It isn't letting you change settings because you have to check the box next to them first. So you can't I can't directly click on quality here, but if I check the box next to quality saying I want there to be a quality change, then I can change it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so.
Sorry, what are the modes again?
Oh, the mode, there's only two. One's scalable, one's multi-scale. Scalable is just slower than multi-scale, so multi-scale is better for like porting to mobile apps. If you want quick run times, like stuff like that. Okay. So
I can't click the options for some reason, like they're grayed out.
Yeah, so you want to check the box to the very left of those options
Okay.
first,
Yep.
and then you can click on them. Yeah. This is just because like they have like their own presets, if that makes sense. And sometimes you just want to add an effect and like not change anything about it. So this is just like an extra safety precaution so that you don't like accidentally fiddle with something and it throws your game out of whack. If you don't have a radius option at all, or you just can't edit it. It isn't there. Are you still on multi-scale? If you're on multi-scale, then your radius option won't show up. Okay. Also, I'll go into what radius means as I go through like a list of what all of these do. Okay, so intensity is kind of like how intensely your shadows show up. Think of this as increasing, decreasing this kind of increases the contrast of your shadows. So if you see here, you can see kind of like on the edge here, how the black kind of like really pops. The shadows kind of really pop. So that's just what intensity deals with. Radius deals with, think about it as like how much like shadow is pushed out, if that makes sense. So like if I have my intensity like set to like something really high, and then here I like increase the radius of the shadows by a lot, and so it just deals with how much the shadow like spills over, if that makes sense. Think of it as like your regular shadow, right? If you stand in front of something, it's gonna like be stretched out. If you stand in front of something else, it's gonna be like really squat. So that's just kind of what the radius deals with. And then
Wait,
also if you guys want to,
I think some people are a little behind.
okay, yeah, sure.
Could you just like say the stuff that you just said again? Because I missed it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, wait, hold on. I just need to bring up the questions just to make sure I'm addressing everything. Okay, yeah, so I'm just gonna run through everything about ambient occlusion again. Mode, scalable versus multi-scale. Multi-scale is faster, but obviously not as intricate. That's kind of just the trade-off with all computing systems. We're gonna use scalable because we're just doing this on PC. Intensity is how intense the blacks are, how intense the shadows are, or whatever color you set here in your scene. So the higher the intensity, the darker my dark shadows will be. The lower the intensity, the lighter or less contrastive my dark shadows will be. My radius deals with how much shadow spills over, or like how much shadow there is. If I have a crack in the sidewalk, you know, like how much of that shadow am I going to be able to see? If you'll see here, if I decrease it or increase it, you see like the shadow like really spills over. You can really see it on the roof, like over here, sort of like how the shadow interacts. And you see how like much that radius kind of increases, decreases. So, you know, there's that. Quality kind of just deals with like how much computing power your computer or game will go into calculating these shadows. We can just keep it at medium. You won't really see that much of a difference, not in this scene, but you can see a little bit. Do you see how now if I set it to ultra, these grooves in the ceiling have like a slight bit of shadow to them? Whereas if this was like medium, you don't really see like the grooves change that much. It's kind of just the ceiling as a whole changes color as opposed to just the grooves. So changing the quality kind of just changes how small and like tiny can my shadows be, and have it still show up like very clearly within the camera. And then color is just the color, the tint that you want the shadow or your ambient occlusion to have. It's not actually shadow. I just call it that to make it a little bit clearer for you guys. So if I set it to red, you guys can see things like a little bit better. You can see like where all these shadows are, that sort of stuff. I go change the radius, we'll do the same thing. Yes.
When I change it to red, it doesn't change to red in my scene.
Look at your game instead of your scene.
Yeah, in my game, it's literally the exact same.
Emily,
there
do you have it
intensity?
set on? If like
Yeah,
there's
it's
the on button and an off button.
Well, like the
click on
check
that
mark
check.
is checked next to color.
No, that's not what I mean.
Oh.
You see underneath of the
it's
words
on.
ambient.
Yeah, it's on.
Is your intensity at a high enough?
Oh, maybe that's. Oh, that's it. I got it.
It's because the reason that this is because red is not as dark of a color as black or dark blue or like those sorts of colors. So it's going to take more to bring out the color red in your shadows, if that makes sense. Like if I put, you know, like a black object next to like a red object, obviously the black object will have a higher contrast, a higher black to it than the red. For the person who asked what intensity was, intensity just deals with, if you see here, how vibrant or how concentrated the ambient occlusion will look. Yes. And for everyone who like kind of wants to follow the, oh, okay, sorry. For anyone who wants to follow the cinematic demo, if you look in the PowerPoint, there will be the exact values for you that we used when we created this scene to begin with. I'm not gonna really follow those. It's kind of whatever. Yeah, it's just if you want to reference. Okay, is everybody good on ambient occlusion as an effect?
Yes.
Yep. Yes, cool. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one is auto exposure. So for anybody who is very good with cameras, you guys are gonna have like a fucking field. You guys are gonna have a field day here. Sorry. I'm just going to very lightly go into what this is, mostly the EV. So EV is exposure, essentially. If I remember correctly, it deals with modifications on your aperture and also your shutter speed if you're looking at it as an actual camera, because of course the Unity camera is holistically a camera. What this does is essentially the higher the number, the less light will be let through, if that makes sense. Like the higher the number, the stronger the light needs to be to penetrate your camera. Does that kind of make sense? It's like when you get your pupils dilated, like how like your pupil like gets like a lot larger, and like suddenly like everything is just like painful for your eyes. It's like, think of it as like there's like a pupil in your camera that's like getting smaller and like larger, and that's controlling the amount of light that gets in. Yeah. So if I likewise set the maximum like really, really small, then everything gets in, like all the light just pours in, and there's, you know, everything's blindingly bright. So you can do this, you know, like you can adjust this as much as you want. You can add this in your scene if you want. Those are really the only two types that we'll go into, because adaptation kind of requires like changes from dark to light areas. Just really quickly, adaptation is just, you know how when you step outside of a movie theater and like you're like, holy shit, like sorry, where you where you see like
We told
What are
Athena that she's not supposed to be swearing on these
Yeah,
videos.
they did.
So
but essentially when you step outside of a movie theater and your eyes need time to adjust, that's what type speed up, speed down essentially requires. So speed up is how much, if I remember correctly, how much time it takes for you to adjust to light, and speed down is how much time it takes for you to adjust to darkness. But obviously the scene is not like, there's no drastic differences in light or dark. So it's just something I'm telling you guys can go and fiddle with this however much you guys want later on. But yeah, any questions on auto exposure? No. And like filtering kind of does like the same stuff. Everything just falls under exposure. It's just how much light gets let in. Okay, no questions, no questions. Cool. Let's move on to the next effect, which is bloom. This is juicy, guys. Bloom is great. Everyone, we love bloom, TLDR. So bloom, bloom deals with when you have like a light in your scene. It deals with essentially how much glow is emulating off of that light. Some examples I can think of is like comparing maybe like a lightsaber to a laser pointer. Like a laser pointer has like a very fine dot, right? There's like almost no bloom to it because it's just like one red dot on whatever object. Versus a lightsaber, you see it glowing off of people's faces. It has like that, like really like a lot of that color like coming off of it, and that's bloom. I honestly, they probably put a lot of bloom effects to make the lightsabers look like that. So if you guys will pay attention to the lights at the back of this scene, I'm just gonna change the color like really quick so you guys can like see stuff. But you know, intensity is the same as ambient occlusion. It's just how strong the bloom will be. So how strong the glow coming off of your light will be. You can, oh, also you guys can like hover over these if you guys like need a refresher on whatever these are. Threshold essentially deals with how much light is filtered out. So if your threshold is like very high, if people are like good with music, think of this as like passes. So anything below this number will be filtered out, if that makes sense. And from a purely math perspective, I believe it is the glow, essentially, the bloom is calculated by like certain pixels on your screen, and each pixel has different intensity and like light value. And it will essentially filter out anything that falls under this threshold light value. So all those pixels will no longer have the bloom effect applied to them. Yeah, and so like, oh my God, I can just, you know, set intensity like up. You guys are gonna need like all of these turned on, I believe. So Softening is kind of the same thing as threshold, except I believe it does it during runtime instead of like pre-baked lights. Clamp, actually forgot what clamp does. Yeah, clamp is also like the bloom amount, like the amount of bloom that you see in the scene. I'm actually going to turn auto exposure off so you guys can see this like a little bit better. I don't know what you guys just doing this. All right, it's because I set it to red. My bad. Let me set it back to white. Let's just yeah. So you guys can just like fiddle around with that like as much as you want. I have like a bunch of settings already, which is why it's like kind of doing this. But yeah, and then you can change your threshold up and then just
How come clamp is like such a large number?
I mean it doesn't have to be. I can like set it lower. I think it's just like that's like the automatic preset.
Also, like when I was making changes to clamp, I didn't see any difference. Or is it just because the number's so high that like I need
kind of like so high that it just
okay.
yeah. Yes. And then dirtiness is kind of like the grain, like when you have sand on a surface, like that's like kind of the dirtiness that we're talking about. You can change textures if you want. There's like certain textures that you guys can use. I'm not sure if lens flares will work with bloom, but you can definitely try it. You can try it. But yeah, again, if you guys want to look, you guys can look within the PowerPoint for the exact like settings that we used. But yeah.
I actually have a question.
Yes.
How does it like right now, like the bloom I see is mostly affecting the lights. How does it know to affect the lights that are in the scene?
Okay, so if I go to the scene, it's because like I'm not sure if it's gonna show you. TLDR, all of these lights are marked with light objects. So the post-processing will only affect light objects, like things with a light component added to them. Yeah. Okay, cool. Does that
Is there a way to reset a like one of these post-process overrides? Like
yeah,
if I want to
can
put my bloom back to its default value, how do I do that?
Yeah, so the 3 buttons on the side, you want to click on those and then just click reset.
Lovely.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just like reset everything, so I have to go back and set everything. And so what anamorphic ratio is if you hover over it, it tells you, but essentially it deals with if the bloom is going to go horizontally or if it's going to go vertically. So if I set the anamorphic ratio to, I don't know why it's not showing up, actually. Like, this is I'm very confused. I don't know why it's not showing up, but just take my word for it. Hopefully it shows up on you guys' computers. But if I set it to -1, I believe that it will essentially like distort it as horizontally as possible. So
Your
there's not
intensity
going to
is
be
0. Is that why it's not showing up?
Oh, probably. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I just reset everything. So yeah, so anamorphic ratio, I change the color again. If it's negative, then it's going to make everything go vertically. My bad, vertically. So all of your bloom will be constricted to a vertical plane. There's not going to be any bloom like spillover or very minimal on the sides. If I set it to 1, you'll see how like it's like very limited on the sides, but it's like spilling out a lot horizontally. Also like on the edges. You guys just edit this like as you want. You can change the color if you want. I'll show you guys like threshold now that like it's working, but like see a threshold of 0, like the bloom is just everywhere. And the higher the number, there's like no more of that bloom effect.
Wait, can you say again what the threshold number actually means? Like
yeah, so essentially it filters out pixels that are under this number. So each pixel has like a brightness or like light value associated with it in bloom. And so the higher the number, if I set it to like 1.5 or whatever, then any pixel that has a bloom light value underneath this threshold does not appear on the screen anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Cool. Any other questions? about this. Okay, cool.
Wait,
Also,
I have a
this-
question.
yeah.
What happens if you put a texture into that thing at the bottom that
Yeah,
says
for sure.
dirtiness?
So essentially, do you see how like this glow right now is like a very uniform kind of like red to gray, like here? If I add a texture to it, I don't know if this will work because I don't know if I have the right textures, but I will try. Let's try like something like this. I don't think it'll. Yeah, do you see how like now you
That
have
is so cool.
yeah, you have the texture of whatever you put into it. So it essentially, it
With
will,
lights.
yeah, it'll like essentially map whatever texture you have onto your bloom. It also like, I think it'll also, oh my God, it also apply the color, which is not really what I want, but that's like probably a good idea for you guys. I think if you have it, so it's just white and black, so like no color attached to it whatsoever, it will instead act as like a mask. So things that are black will like just not appear, and things that are white will appear. Let me see if I can like find them. I'm not sure any of these will work. Yeah, TLDR, the texture just slaps a texture on top of whatever bloom pixels you have in your scene. Okay, any other questions? Oh, okay, cool. We're gonna move on to the next one, which is chromatic aberration. Big words for a very simple process. If you guys look in the PowerPoint, let me find the link for it. It's slide 14. It shows you a pretty good example of what it is. But for a more like base level understanding, everything is made up of RGB values, right? And that stands for red, green, blue. And so it's a combination of the red, green, blue values that create whatever color you have on the scene, right? So this gray is like arbitrarily, it could be like red 100, green 100, blue 100. What chromatic aberration does is it takes those values and then it offsets them slightly. So if I have like this wall right here, or if I have this like orange strip right here, this is probably a better explanation, I'm going to offset my red to the left by like a tiny bit. I'm going to offset my green to the, you know, like up a little bit, my blue down a little bit. And I'll just like show you really quickly. You don't really need this spectral. This looks like, but do you see what I mean? Do you see like here on the yellow, on the orange strip, the red has been offset vertically. The green has been offset like vertically as well, a little bit further down. You see over here, the blue in the lights has been offset to the left. So it's essentially just, is it like rotating hue? Hue is not the same thing. What this is doing is it's taking the RGB values and offsetting themselves. Like it'll each think
Like
of each
offsetting
edge.
them in space in the
Yes,
like
yes,
on the
yes.
screen, as
Yes.
opposed to offsetting them with their values.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it's think of each object as like one red object, one green object, one blue object, and you just kind of like move them around a little bit. Whereas changing your hue or like varying your hue is like using a color wheel and just like adjusting the RGB values there. It's
Takes the 3 RPG camera images
I
and placed them on
kind
top
of, yeah,
each other imperfectly.
kind of. Yeah.
Don't games like use this like when you like were supposed to be like disoriented or something?
Yeah. So you'll see this a lot. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that, Athena. Like, I see this effect all the time, but like, I can't think of it right now. What is usually the reason that you would use this effect? Like, what are you trying to achieve?
A lot of people use this. Well, first let me answer Theodore's question. Basically, yes. Yes. As for your question, a lot of them use them for like things that need to be distorted, like distorted effect glitches. You see this a lot. This is because like when things glitch out on a screen, it's usually because the RGB values are not like showing up properly. Yeah, so like it's like instances like that. If I can just pull up. I'm going to
Cyberpunk vibes. Yeah.
see if I can change my screen share. Hold on. New share.
So
New
dope.
share here.
I feel like when you wake up in a game,
So
and then
yeah,
it's back to normal.
So do you guys like see like the glitch screen effect? How like this deals with like sort of your RGB CYMK values. So that is what that's like kind of like what you see it used a lot for. So hopefully that helps with you like, you know, like deciding where to put it. I'm not going to go into color theory right now. There's like a a whole lot that like I could talk about like when it comes to that. But yes.
Okay, so what is spectral LUT then?
Here, hold on. If I just hover over it. So it just like changes the color of your chromatic aberration. I don't know. Again, I don't have like the right textures for this. But do you see? Oh, I don't know why it does that. But it's essentially different ways to distort the image that you have on your screen. Zoom in, you'll see that like chromatic aberration is not a perfect orange color, even though it just seems like the shape is distorting. But yeah, you just it'll just put different textures onto your chromatic aberration. That's probably a little bit of a better one. So if I understand, it can actually like change the colors that you're using too. So it'll, instead of like using colors, it'll instead use the texture that you have. So here is just like you're overlaying a tree bark texture onto your image, and then the camera is going, or your computer is going, okay, so I see you have this texture. I will rearrange my image accordingly to the texture that you have given me. Hopefully that like kind of makes sense.
Does it? I don't know. I'm so confused.
It's like all of these like honestly take like just like testing them yourself. Also, you can
Yeah.
read the documentation on Unity. I'm not like an expert on every single one of these.
Athena, are you serious? You're not?
My bad. I'm sorry.
Athena, how could you even give this tutorial without being an expert?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. But yeah, you guys can just like fiddle with these. You guys can search Unity chromatic aberration and it will bring up the documentation for that as well. You guys can read into it in more detail. Any other questions about this?
Do you happen to know if there's a way to like change the angle at which the like colors are getting offset by?
Yeah, that has to deal more with your camera itself. Like there's ways to, I think it's like scale or something like that, but you know how like how you can see things on an isometric plane? It's like doing that same thing except with your camera. I'm not sure like off the top of my head exactly how to
Like
do it, but it's not a
orthographic
post-processing.
view is what you're talking about?
Sorry?
Are you talking about orthographic and isometric
Yeah,
view?
like something like that, yeah.
Or I mean like perspective camera view.
Yeah, like changing your to like a perspective camera. It's not like an actual, it's not a post-processing component is what I'm saying. I don't believe. Yes. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone is good. We're gonna move on to color grading. Also super fun. Artists, you guys are gonna love this one, while the photographers love the last one. So mode, you have high definition range, low definition range, pretty self-explanatory. Essentially it just deals with how high or low definition your color grading will seem. So how perfect or imperfect these color picking will be. I'll just go through and I'll kind of explain what these do. So temperature, there's two different types. There's cool and there's hot or warm, cold or hot. Cold is more blue, warm is more red. So if I adjust this, you'll see if I adjust it down, it's like a lot more blue. If I adjust it up, it's a lot more red. You'll see that it's called white balance because it's adjusting kind of what it mostly does is it adjusts the whites in your game, if that makes sense. Like if I had something that was like solid black, you'll see like the black colors change like a lot less than your lighter colors. That makes sense because it's balancing the white colors in your game. I see it. We have another question. Yeah, white balance is very common on phones. You'll see like when you have like those like different modes. I remember iPhone used to have that where it's like dark mode and you'll see like the screen turn orange. That's like a temperature balance to like warm. Okay. Tint is kind of the same thing, except it does it on the whole RGB spectrum. If you combine these two, you'll see that like you can create like a bunch of different colors. You'll be able to create essentially every color in the spectrum. So, you know, that's like if you want to do anything there. There you go. Post exposure. We love this. This is, again, the same thing as what we talked about with, where was it? With auto exposure. This is just another format of that. Whenever you see EV, it just deals with like the exposure value. That's what it stands for. And it's, again, just how sensitive the camera is to light. Color filter. Also kind of self-explanatory. Essentially everything that it'll bring out this color in objects, if that makes sense. So it's going to enhance the, you know, like the turquoises or the blues or like that sort of thing. You can create a cool, like, I guess like strobe room effect if you just honestly change the color filter and code and just keep cycling through all the colors.
Question.
Yes, question.
What order do these color changes go in? So like if you were to apply a bloom and have it be red and then on top of that do a color filter that's like, you know, I don't know, is not red, are you gonna, like, which one happens first?
So
like if you have a bloom that's red and then you say like make all the reds brighter, since red wasn't in the original scene, is your red bloom gonna get brighter or what?
That's a good question. Let me actually test that real quick. I'm not too sure. I have like an idea, but I don't want to give you like the wrong information. Actually, let's set it so it's, yeah. Okay, so what is happening is essentially you can think of color grading as happening last, I guess, is like the simplest way to put it. You'll see here how your color filter is this like greenish color, but there's still like hints of that yellow or like a little more yellow green from your bloom effect. Think of it as your bloom is me putting a piece of colored filter paper over the light itself. And the color filter is me putting a piece of colored paper in front of the camera lens. So the white light will filter through the colored paper put over itself, which is the bloom. And then that color will then filter through the colored paper that I've put over the camera lens, which is the color filter itself. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so all of color grading is like
yes.
specifically talking about like, or it's like, I guess the last pixels that.
Yes, exactly. It deals with, you know, like whatever's right in front of your camera. It's just putting like a piece of colored paper in front of your camera. Yes.
These seem to be like very similar options to what you would see on Instagram or like any other artist thing.
It's because like all of these kind of like take from each other, you know, like photography, videography, they're interchangeable elements when it comes to like games as well. Okay, and like all of these just like kind of manipulate the tone. Like you'll see here, like you have like the values here. So hue shift is kind of just like shifting the color filter that you have. Saturation is how bright that color is. So if it's, I set it to none, it's going to be black and white. If I set it to all, it's like glaringly bright. Here, this is probably a better way to show it. Yeah, so like this is like glaringly bright orange, whereas this is dark. You also notice that the lights are now orange, even though I set it to yellow here, and it's because of this color filter. Okay, and then let me turn the saturation down like a little bit. And contrast, kind of the same thing as ambient occlusion, except it deals with like everything and not just your shadows. So this jacks up the contrast of my darks versus my lights. or, you know, like smooths them out, that sort of thing. Okay, cool. So here, mixing colors, you guys would like, I think like to get like a full understanding is to just know more about color theory itself, but essentially this does a lot of the same stuff as everything else. It just filters, essentially it just like decides how much red, how much green, and how much blue I will be showcasing, like I will be letting through the camera, right? So here I'm putting like a red piece of paper over my camera. Here I'm putting like a green piece of paper over my camera.
How is this different from the color filter? Because you could just choose an RGB value.
Tone. Okay, so tone is a little bit more like, there's like a level of translucency to it, if that makes sense. Like, if I turn this off. Oh fuck. Okay, hold on. Here, I'm just gonna reset this real quick. I forgot the values I used. Okay. Okay, so tone. I'll set it to like the same color that I had. And then I'll turn the saturation up. Do you see how like the yellow still shines through? Like here?
Yeah.
The yellow still shines through on the light. So tone is essentially you're adding green, but you're not taking away any other color values, if that makes sense. So you're going to be adding numbers, but you're not going to be subtracting anything. Whereas your channel mixer is like holistically just filtering things to that color. So like the more red, I'm just going to make everything more red. This is now orange. And just keep going. Does that like kind of make sense?
Yeah. I also noticed that there's 3 channels, and
Yes.
the red channel starts with red at 100, green starts with green at 100, blue as
Yes.
well. So like, how does that work? Is
These are
that
just
like
presets.
the baseline, like how much like RGB is going to go
Yeah.
in, but then you could change it to be based on something that's not red, green, and blue instead?
Yes. I see there's like a lot of notifications.
They're just spamming the chat because Mark is here.
Well, yeah, so like essentially it's saying like in your red channel, how much red is there? In your green channel, how much green is there? In your blue channel, how much blue is there? Does that make sense? So like when I apply the final RGB value, I will be looking at this channel mixer.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All of these, honestly, you don't really need to worry about like lift, gamma, or gain unless like you're really like super intense about color grading. I don't even like really know the intricacies of this, so you guys can like just fiddle around with it if you like want. Lift, I believe, deals with like the shadows, like what the shadows are going to look like. Gamma, I think it's like the mid values, and then like gain is like the lights themselves, like the brighter values. So you guys can like, you know, fiddle with it as you wish, but just remember as like lift is dark, gamma is mid, and then gain is like light. Cool. I don't really know how to use a grading curve, so I'm not going to go into that. The grading curve is essentially just, I believe it's like how you want like the colors to appear like on a certain scale. It is kind of beyond me. If you're really intense about color grading, feel free to just like look up the Unity documentation for this. But yeah, so hopefully that's like people are getting what I am doing with color grading. If you guys have questions about color grading, please let me know. Is it like rval equals, yes, Theodore, that is exactly correct. Okay. All right, no questions? I will move on to the next one, which is depth of field. So depth of field, I'm just going to sell all of these. If I can see anything. Hello. Okay, yeah, there you Okay, so depth of field, you know how like they talk about this in movies where they're like, oh wow, this show like depth of field or whatever, or like Handmaiden was like kind of praised for that if people have watched it, but essentially just deals with how focused your camera is on certain things. If your camera is your eye, then think of your focus distance as where things are the clearest. So for me, it's at 10. You can hover over it and like just see it, so like distance to the point of focus, right? So if I adjust this up, you guys won't see much difference here, unfortunately, but you guys can see like the edges kind of blurring out. It's a little bit more gradual than anything else. But it essentially just deals with how far do I need to be from an object to see it in perfect focus. So in this case, it's just 10 units. Aperture, not only does it deal with brightness, it deals with kind of the same thing. So the lower my aperture, the more, I believe it's the more shallow my depth of focus. So essentially, if we're looking at this in terms of an eye, aperture, the lower your aperture, the more nearsighted you are. So you need to be able to hold things like right up to your face when it's like a very small number, and you basically have the eyes of a hawk when you set it to like a very high number. So that's what aperture deals with. And focal length, it's like kind of the same thing. So aperture, focal length kind of do the same thing. The higher your focal length now, it's the more shallow your depth of field. So the higher the focal length, the more nearsighted I am. The lower my focal length, the sharper my eyes are. And it just does the same thing. And then blur size, let me make this a little bit higher. It just deals with how blurry the objects that are blurred are. So you'll see if I set it to very large, the objects smear like a lot more. If I set it to very small, you know, they don't blur out as much. It essentially just puts a threshold on how much your objects can blur. So if it's small, I'm saying I only want to blur it up to this point. If it's very large, then I want to blur it up to like that point. So different thresholds. So does that make sense to people? Any questions about this part? No? Okay, we're gonna move on. Still got a lot. Okay, so grain is the same thing as putting kind of like slapping a texture over your screen, except there's only one texture. You only have one grain texture. And the reason that this is because grain deals exclusively with the pixels on your screen. So it's not like you can change the pixels to have different sizes or like you can't change them to have like different textures. Sorry, not sizes, you can change the size. So I'm just going to check all of these and just go through it and show you guys what they mean. So intensity is just how much grain is there, right? So you'll see like the very high number produces like a lot of grain. Grain is like these little like pixels on the screen. You see this a lot like on these old TVs. When you like go up close to the TV, you can see like those like little dots on the TV. And so grain is just making those dots more apparent. I believe the way that it does it is every pixel, it will assign like a randomized RGB value, which will then be overlaid over whatever image you have. Don't quote me on that.
Is it not like some version of noise? Like
it's basically a version.
Shout out to our tutorial last week in advance if anyone went to that.
Yeah. But yeah, if anybody knows what noise is, it's like kind of the same thing. Size, you can change like the size of the grain. What this essentially does is instead of every single pixel having a different randomized value, it's every grouping of pixels has like a different randomized value. So yeah, so that's what size does. Luminance, I believe, controls essentially how drastic that randomized RGB value will be. So yeah, so the lower value, like it means less noise in darker areas, reading off of the luminance thing. But from like a visual perspective, I've always seen it as like the lower the value, the more RGB values, like you'll have, and the higher the value, the less. Okay, I see I have chat. Yes, a haunted camera effect, exactly. Honestly, like these effects are like really great for making like horror atmospherics like very easily if that's like something that you're interested in. So yeah, is that for you guys? Okay, any other questions? Am I going too fast? Too slow? Do you want me to shut the fuck up and just like show you guys everything? Oh fuck. Oh wait.
Yeah, I think you're doing fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely not. I don't think it's too fast for sure.
Okay, cool.
I love
Okay.
I love how you said you cursed, and then when you correct your curse, you cursed
No.
again.
Oh, it's so hard.
Peter says curse counter needed.
Oh god. It's okay. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're just gonna move on. Okay. So lens distortion. This is actually a very interesting one. So have you guys like, let's say you guys like have like a Christmas ornament, and every time you guys like look into that ornament, your face is just like really warped across that ornament, right? So lens distortion essentially copies that same effect. So if we're to use it here, do you see how like it completely like stretches the image around like almost like a sphere? And so that's kind of what it does. Mark probably knows a little bit more about like the actual mapping behind this, but just think about it as you're, instead of just like having like a straight on image, you're mapping that image onto a sphere instead.
I don't know anything about that. Don't ask me that.
Okay. Cool.
I can make up an answer. Do you want
Yeah.
that?
It seems like
And-
they just take some kind of like you know, function to
Yeah.
figure out
Yeah.
how to shift the pixels.
Yeah, it's just honestly it's something like that. And you know, the lower the intensity, the more it's going to be like a concave. Yes.
Why would you
No, wait.
want to use this? It's cool, but it's like
They were trying to make like a fisheye effect, right?
Yes, it's a fisheye effect. So like, let's say you don't have to have it on all the time, right? So one instance that I've seen this used is, let's say you're in a racing video game and then you suddenly speed up, right? Sometimes like having like just like this effect, like, and let's say like this light right here was your car, that gives it like that really punchy like speed up effect, right? Obviously you can go back to normal after like a few seconds of that, but you know, like, you know, conversely this kind of shows like a slow down effect and speed up effect kind of thing. You guys can like look up videos of how this is used. That's just like off the top of my head where I remember it being.
Another example, you can script this along a curve. So you can imagine if you're doing kind of like a teleportation effect, you can like zoom it out and then quickly zoom it back in, kind of have like a bounce to it. And that adds kind of like this weird warp effect of like you're jumping somewhere. Like I'm trying to think, like Dishonored 2, if you know the one level where you're like switching back and forth between two like timelines, that uses a very similar warp effect to this. Off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll probably like make a playlist
Sorry.
and like link you guys the
Slight
playlist.
spoiler.
I'll probably make a playlist and link you guys a playlist afterwards of like games where that use these like specific effects. But yeah, so like those are instances that you guys can see it.
Mark
Can you
just brought up
manipulate
the-
these?
Oh, sorry. You go. Matt.
Sorry. Can you manipulate these values in scripts?
Yes, all of
That's
these
exactly
values
what I
can
was
be
gonna say,
manipulated
too.
in scripts. Every single one of these values can be manipulated in scripts. Yes. Yes. I believe the way that you would do this is you have a post-processing object, and then you would access the post-processing volume component, and then from there you would then go into your ambient occlusion or whatever, and then access those variables. It's kind of very nested, but it's all accessible through code.
You can also use animators to link to these specific variables
Exactly.
and control them much more finely than you would be able to with just like, I don't know, like adding values to it directly. Which is where you can make like a cool effect of like, oh, I want to teleport somewhere, let's warp it back and forth like that. Or maybe if I'm taking a lot more damage, I can add more grain to the screen or something like that. So you can link it and dynamically change it. So that's kind of the nice thing about doing this in a game engine, is that you get this extra effect of like, oh, I can script how the image looks compared to like some inputs in the game. So that's where you can get really creative with it.
Yes.
As
Yes,
opposed to
indeed.
like just a movie, right?
Yes. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so the rest of the lens distortion, sorry, my bad, deals with essentially where your sphere is placed, how it's placed. So your X multiplier, if I just change this a little bit, yeah. So if I have like a very small X multiplier, my God, I can't talk. There will be no distortion along the horizontal axis. So you see here how like the windows or like the lights have been distorted like vertically, but there's no horizontal distortion. It's the same thing if I change my Y multiplier. If I set these both to 0, then like nothing happens, of course. But you'll see if I set the X multiplier a lot, everything's stretched on a horizontal plane, but not vertically. I'm just gonna set these both back. Okay, and your center just deals with where in the screen, in the game space, where the center of the sphere is. So if I set the X lower, you'll see that the center is like somewhere far to the left. If I set it higher, it's somewhere far to the right. Same thing with the Y. You don't probably like no one will use as drastic as values of that, but like those are just drastic examples. And then scale.
Question.
Yes.
So I noticed that this is happening not only in the scene view, but also in the, or not only in the game view, but also in the scene view, which is not the case for all of the post-processing effects that we've seen. So like, are you actually changing the world when you do like lens distortion right now? Like, why is it happening in the scene view?
You're not changing the world. What you're doing is you're just changing the camera lens. Think of it as like the camera lens. You see how like in the camera preview, it's like completely normal, but because the camera has the post-processing layer attached to it, if I just turn this off, everything goes back to normal.
Yeah, but you're not viewing like the scene through that camera, are you?
I mean, I think so. I think you are, because like if I turn the camera off, the scene just goes to normal. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And then scale just deals with like how severe that stretch is. Like I can like zoom it like way in like this, or like all the way down like that. Yeah, so it just deals with how severely I'm stretching it around that sphere. Yes. Okay, any questions?
Some very trippy stuff there.
Yes. You can create a lot of cool effects in your games with this.
Another example I just thought of, you can make like a cool black hole effect with this. That sort of, I think like Outer Wilds uses something similar to this effect with the black holes that they have in the game, as far as like warping the scene around it. I'm not sure specifically how they implement it, but I'd imagine it's using something similar to this lens distortion.
Yeah.
Does this have any, I mean, not this in particular, but post-processing, does it have any effect on like 2D games or not really?
Yeah. Because this affects the camera, if you apply it to a 2D scene, it will warp in very similar ways. Yes.
Okay.
Also because a lot of these like chromatic aberration, color grading, bloom, these deal with colors less so than physical objects. You're not ever manipulating physical objects in a scene, right? So yeah, this will work perfectly fine in 2D. Okay, cool. Next effect, motion blur. This is also a fun one. Unfortunately, I cannot show you very well on just like a flat scene view. I'm actually gonna, this is just so annoying to me. Sorry, I'm gonna turn it off. But I'll just like tell you guys like what these two do. Essentially, one controls how much motion blur there is, the other controls the quality of your motion blur. So your shutter angle, you can just hover over it and see. The larger your exposure is, then the more blur you're going to have. So like even the smallest movements will cause blur, if I'm not mistaken. So that's what this one does. So like okay, cool. If I want to adjust the number to be like really high, then like small minute movements will even cause blur. If it's very low, then like only like very fast velocities will ever cause, like movement blur. And sample count just deals with the quality of that blur. Think of it as like, this does with samples points, but I'll just explain it in terms of frames it might be a little bit easier conceptually. But if my sample count was very high, and let's say I wanted motion blur, and my game or whatever was operating at 24 frames per second, then I might just pick every other frame and blur those. So, you know, like, which is a very high sample count. You know, you're sampling every other frame that exists. However, if my sample count was very low, then I might be like, oh, I might, out of 24 frames, I only want to sample 1 out of every 12 frames, then blur between those. And so that increases your performance because you don't have to retain as many frames, but it decreases the quality of your motion blur because you can really only go from point A to point B instead of point A to B to C to D and all the way back to the original. Does that make sense for everybody? Cool.
So the motion blur, is it referring specifically to like objects moving that the camera captures, or is it like
Yes.
movement of the camera?
Oh shit, that's actually a good question. I believe it's both.
I think it's both as well.
Yeah, because the shutter speed it just captures any movement like in.
So any kind of like change in the pixels. So even if it was like the object wasn't actually moving, but it had a like changing texture on it, that would get motion blur on it as well. Like
You can just drop like a cube in the scene and just move it around to demo it.
Yeah, hold on. Oh yeah, I'll just make one. There she is. Okay, hopefully that works. It's not gonna, oh, I don't have it set. Hold on. I don't think it really works until.
Maybe move it into the preview display of the game.
Oh god,
If that's not too much effort.
I have no clue where that is. Oh, this is so.
You can see the frustum.
Huh?
You can see the frustum of the camera.
Yes, let me.
I'm saying like that, like it's easy to figure that out. It's not, but
let me. Boy. Oh boy.
This is so funny.
we're doing it live.
You're like move this little like cube and trying to capture it on the camera.
Okay.
Just wait, go into the camera and just copy paste the transform.
Yeah.
Oh yes, you're
Manipulate
correct.
the transform manually.
Ooh, those are some really ugly numbers. I know.
You can like copy the actual values from it rather than one by one. If you like right click the transform itself.
You know what?
Okay, well I mean
Oh,
for future
you know
reference,
what?
guys, you can do things. Little shortcuts you pick up.
Oh god.
Athena's gonna yell at me later because I pointed that out.
No, it's fine. I don't.
Mark's like, you can actually be efficient, unlike Athena here, who's demonstrating what you should not do.
Okay, hold on.
There's a cube.
Yes,
Wow.
there's a cube. Wow. Also, I have like very high depth of field, so that's why it looks like that. But maybe I should turn that off if I want to show you guys. Hold on.
She said we're leaving everything.
I just got lazy. So it's not gonna. I don't think it works until you play.
Okay, question. Isn't motion blur always on? Depends on what you mean by motion
default?
blur.
If you mean like default Unity has motion blur, I don't think it does.
It shouldn't, I don't believe.
Yeah. But I don't think motion blur works until it doesn't start computing until like game.
Give
Yes.
that like give it like a rigid body to the cube, set it in the air right in front of the
Yes, I could
camera,
do
and then
that.
play the game and then watch it fall.
I could do that as well. Okay, that's fine. Set this number really high then. Okay, let's see this. Please. Oh, fuck. It's not gonna. It's because I remember now. It's because Cinemachine makes it so that like all of these, it doesn't like actually start where the camera is pointing to at this moment.
Oh yeah, it like
It
teleports
starts
it
like
somewhere.
it starts right there, like where the gear is. So, you know, you guys can perhaps take our word for it. I'm sorry that I can't show you guys, but like that is fundamentally how it works. Is just shutter angle controls the amount of motion blur, the sensitivity of it, sample count controls the quality of it. I am not very well versed in Cinemachine. The person who made this, like the Cinemachine, I did not do it.
Oh, so when you said, okay, when you said isn't motion blur always on, what you actually meant is isn't the effect constantly happening? And the answer is yes, it is.
Oh yes, that was true. God, I don't remember how to use Cinemachine anymore. Okay, the answer is yes, you can. You're going to need to go into these.
Do you have an event code, Athena?
I will make one after. I'm sorry. I apologize.
What are we trying to do now?
Oh, somebody asked me like how to change the speed of the camera, and the answer is yes, you can. I have slightly forgotten how. It just has to deal with these camera animators and the dolly tracks. There should be some component in there that lets you change the speed. I'm sorry that I cannot clarify that for you right now.
Wait, if it's on animations, I think you can change the frame rate of the animation.
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah,
is that true?
yes, you
You should
can.
probably change the speed of the animation. So.
Yes, that's like a whole other thing. So I'm just not gonna really go into it because you have to go there and create like go to your animator and like everything. But yeah, it's like somewhere in there. But yes, okay. We only have like a few effects left, so I'm just gonna go through them. So Unity, this is. I'll leave that one for last because it's the juiciest in my opinion. So we're gonna go to vignette first. And if any of you guys have seen that like Instagram filter where like there's like the gray or like the black on the outside and it's like in the center there's like a circle that's like clear. This is essentially what vignette does. So if I just set all of these on, okay, classic color, and I set the intensity, you see how like it creates that kind of circular effect around whatever object you have. That's essentially what vignette does. It like clouds or like blacks out the corners of your screen. And why people use this effect is it brings out whatever's in the center. You can also use a vignette effect if you want the player to only be able to view like a very specific area. So if I like make the intensity like very high and then I drag the smoothness down, then they can only see everything within this specific area, right? Likewise, you know, like roundedness deals with like how round I'm going to make my view, and is rounded just deals with making it like a perfect circle or like a perfect square. Yes. Yeah. So like, you know, if this is like a mystery game and like, or like a flashlight, then this is like a good way to do it is by manipulating a vignette post-processing effect. Yeah. And then smoothness is like how smooth the gradient is. Do you see like at 0 or 0.01, these are sharp edges. It goes directly from completely black to your image. The higher the smoothness, the like more gradual the gradient from black to your image is. Let me change the intensity down a little bit. Yeah. And then of course you can change the color of this. So you can make it red, make it whatever. I will just say that black is the only color that will completely mask something. Everything else will kind of give it a color overlay. The thing about, you know, like if you do it as like a mask layer versus classic layer is exactly what I said. Mask only, I believe like mask hold on. Yeah, mask like only puts like only allows like a color and an opacity, and then it'll mask essentially that whatever texture you give it with those settings into like a vignette effect. So if I sure. Yeah, so do you guys see that? Like it just like kind of like tosses on a mask over your camera. Yes. Just gonna reset that real quick. Yes. So any questions about that effect? No? Yes, no? Cool. Now we're on to the final one. This one is juicy. It's very juicy. Screen space reflections. It seems like nothing now. I'm just gonna turn off like most of this stuff just so you guys can see it a little bit better. I'll leave the bloom on. It'll help. So what this does, let's set the preset to overkill, and you'll see like it will reflect whatever light off of the other surfaces around it. It'll essentially like treat everything as like a reflective surface. And so you can change the maximum arch distance, which is like how far away from whatever reflective object it is before the image disappears. So let's say this light is reflecting. Once I'm like here, more than 100 units away, the light will no longer be reflecting. The distance fade is how long or like how far away that single object will like fade. Like my shadow itself will only have a distance of X. And the vignette effect just kind of just does the same thing. It like darkens the corners of whatever thing is being reflected. Yes. So yeah, let's set it to overkill. You guys can see it a little bit better. Yeah.
Let's say you put this on like water or something.
Sorry.
So let's say you wanted to put like this effect on only like water to get
Okay.
reflections on it. How would you apply it to water?
How would you apply to water? Let's see here. So what you would have to do is you would probably need to create a separate post-processing object. You need to set it so that the only let's see here. I think you would need to create like a post-processing layer where only the water layer is affected by the post-processing. So yeah, so like water, only water. And then in your post-processing object, you don't want it to be global. And then you just want to have like a really, really high like screen space reflection of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So water is like kind of a difficult thing to
It is.
render reflections with because it's also transparent, which is why like most video game water does not look very realistic, because it's very difficult to get good looking water in real time, which I guess like recent developments in like ray tracing are making that look a lot better. But yeah, typically with this style of reflection, it's done so that it's like at least somewhat efficient. And if you want it to look really good, it's not going to be efficient. So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah. Exactly. Because like also like water is not static. So, you know, like you run into that difficulty as well. Like, how do I make non-static, semi-transparent thing reflective?
I think it's also worth noting, so how these reflections are actually handled is if you look at the actual material of all these objects in the scene, they're going to have a component called metallic, which is essentially a layer. It's an extra texture that sort of defines like what regions are reflective. So you can imagine if you have like, I don't know, like a gun, for example, that your player is using, and parts of it are metal, but parts of it are plastic. You'd want the metal parts to be reflective, but the plastic parts not to be. So the artist who makes that actually has to define a metallic layer to say that, like, I want these regions to be reflective and these ones to be non-reflective. So if you were just to make like a default material, it might be easy to see.
I don't have any materials
I
on
guess,
this. Hold
yeah.
on.
A little hard to explain without an example, but essentially, if you were to put like a base cube in the scene, it will have no metallic layer, so it will not reflect anything, but
Yeah.
it will be reflected by other objects. This
Here,
gets
I'll
more
put
into
a-
like how materials work in Unity and
Yeah.
game engines in general, but
I'm gonna make a cube.
worth noting at least.
Cube. How do I copy?
Right click transform, and then you should be able to copy.
That's dope.
Yeah, make note of that shortcut, guys.
Is the tutorial done? Because if so, I have an announcement.
Oh god.
God.
No.
Empathy. You couldn't wait. You couldn't wait. But yeah, do you see how here? I'll turn gizmos off as well.
Well, I mean, the good thing about it is
Let me know when we're
You
done.
see how like the cube doesn't actually like reflect anything, but it's reflected in the surfaces around it.
So I think you can actually look at the material of that cube, and it'll be a bit more
It's just
clear.
default. And then you
Okay,
can
well
change
that's what I
it.
mean. It's like if you look at the default material, yeah, try just like some random material.
I'll like make it like this is like ultra reflective, so you can see like it almost perfectly reflects like things around it.
Cool.
Kind of. It looks kind of weird though. But yeah.
The
Yeah,
reason
so-
it looks weird is you made all your bloom yellow.
So material is typically
Totally.
linked to the 3D model that it's designed for. So it will have a separate texture layer, a separate metal layer, metallic layer, a separate albedo layer. Am I correct? I'm trying to
Yes.
like remember off the top of my head.
Yes.
And then a UV
Yeah.
layer.
Mhm.
And will we go into detail on those at some point, or? should I explain it?
I mean, like I could, yeah.
It could be fun to do a
Sure.
tutorial.
Yeah, I
on
might
that.
as well explain it. Do you want to do that or should I? I guess I kind of brought it up, but
We can discuss that after the tutorial.
yeah, let's wait till we're
But
done.
I will just say that like this has been long winding and a lot of like explanations like in between, but like these are all like sort of the post-processing effects that exist within this plugin. And TLDR, like just some like buttons or sliders can give you guys like a very polished look in your game, right? So like if I turn this off, this is what the game looks like, right? Turn it on, this is what it looks like. You know, like no computation needed, no like really assets even needed. You just need to add like components, I guess. But yeah, a little work for, you know, like really goes along with this. And yeah,
Question, Athena.
yes.
How do you ensure that you don't apply so many post-processing effects that it like crashes your game like speed? You know?
Okay, so I would say like first, less is more. When it comes to post-processing, it's called post-processing for a reason, right? You should already have everything set up. You don't want to rely on post-processing to essentially like make your game, if that makes sense. Something else is that all of these presets have low, you know, like lower like sort of qualities to them, right? I'll just like turn these on. Hold on. You know, like if let's find there. Let's find something. Hello. Where was it? Oh yeah. So like something like motion blur. You know, like if I want my game to run faster, if it's like running really slow, I just turn the sample count down. Obviously you will sacrifice quality at this point. But that's the trade-off, right? It's like either you have like a lot of quality, but like it's very computationally intensive, or you know, it's not as, you know, quality, but it's a lot more efficient. And it's just like up to you to find that balance. If you're worried about your computer crashing, then I recommend setting everything to the lowest value and then kind of like incrementing and working your way up until you reach like what you think is like an optimal threshold.
Just to be clear though, I'm pretty sure like it's going to be calculating all of these things like every single frame. Is that true? They might like cache some of them actually, like
Yeah, some
but
of them will not be calculated. every
as
single
cool
frame.
as it is for us to like mess around with all of these filters, just always keep in mind that like it is going to take a hit to your performance. So you really need to like keep that in mind when you're doing any kind of post-processing. If like, you know, as long as you're not going overboard, you should be fine, but just
Mhm.
don't go overboard.
Typically within the scope of like what we make in our games, it's not too much of an issue because we're not dealing with like a lot of
Yeah, our
optimization
games
issues.
are definitely like smaller than this.
Yeah.
even.
But it's worth keeping in mind that like not everyone may be able to run your game if you put too many of these
Mhm.
effects on, which is where like adding an options menu is good, but I
Yeah.
want my games to look like Crisis. I don't think Peter.
Okay. Yes. Whoever's recording, you can probably stop recording now because that is the end of our tutorial.
Athena's like, I want to say bad words.
No, that's not